Ghanaian church weddings are such a beautiful ceremony that demonstrate the seamless relationship between Ghanaian tradition and European church tradition. So if you go to a typical Ghanaian church wedding, the groom will be seated in the church and the bride with the bridal team, including her family, will be walked down the aisle, and then the bride will join the groom. The minister of the ceremony, typically the pastor, will pick up the microphone after the normal church prayer and everything and ask who is giving this woman's hand in marriage to this man. The woman's father or a male figure from the woman's family side will walk up, typically in kente-cloth. The pastor will ask the bride's father, has the man performed all customary requirements necessary for this marriage to proceed? Because in Ghanaian tradition, marriage is not between a man and a woman. Marriage is between a family and another family. So the family has to be involved, but European wedding ceremonies are between the man and the woman, so families are not involved. So the pastor asking the woman's father if the man has performed the customary requirement to proceed with the marriage ceremony is a way of involving the families in the ceremony. And so typically before the church ceremony, we have what we call the traditional wedding, or colloquially called engagement. So an engagement in the Ghanaian setting is not when the man asks the woman to marry them. No, an engagement in the Ghanaian setting is when the traditional marriage ceremony happens. Typically, at that engagement, the man's family will go to the woman's house. I'll use the Ashanti way of doing it as my example. A woman from the man's family, typically his auntie, would say, I go. That's a way of saying, I'm knocking. And then somebody from the woman's family will ask, who is there? We are from so-and-so family. What do you want here? The man's auntie will say, we are here to give you some gifts. And so the woman's family will say, okay, come in, have a seat. And then they will say something in Chi, Kwansue, which means, how was your journey? And then you will say, I had a fruitful journey. And then they'll ask you, what do you want? And then you say, well, our brother or our son have said he's seen some beautiful flower in this house. He wants us to come and pluck it. And that part of the marriage ceremony is my favorite part, because usually the woman's family will pick the funniest person and the man's family will also pick the funniest person. They usually go back and forth with a lot of humor. So she will say something like, well, as you can see, all the floor in this house is plastered, so there are no trees here. It's usually very fun. It's a beautiful, colorful ceremony. A lot of time, both of them will wear kente. But I'm saying all this as a setup to talk about the use of musical instruments in Ghanaian churches. My name is Nenebi Tony. This is Do or Die channel. As you can see, this setup is different from my typical setup. This is because normally I use my phone as the camera and I have another microphone I use. And the reason why I'm using this setup is because I live in the US, and in the US, 4th of July is a public holiday where they celebrate when Thomas Jefferson and his white American friends realized that their lives was just as valuable as white Europeans. Americans typically celebrate 4th of July with barbecue, visits to water bodies, whether it's a pool or a lake. And you know, as immigrants, we like to out-America Americans. So I was at a pool with some friends and I jumped into the pool with my phone in my pocket, which means that for the next 48 to 72 hours, I'm going to be going on Twitter and Instagram on my MacBook like I'm living in 2010. So I'm recording this video with my MacBook and it's different. It looks different. Hopefully it comes out well. Even though I don't have my laptop, I'm still recording because I have a personal commitment which I set up from April 13th that for the next 90 days, I'm going to upload at least 2 videos onto my YouTube channel on Sundays and on Wednesdays. It's a personal commitment that I have decided to honor no matter what. July 13th, I would decide whether the 90 days of me uploading videos to YouTube was worth me going ahead and keep doing it, or I should just close shop and move on with my life. That's how I make decisions. I have an idea, I experiment with the idea, I give myself time to see how the experimentation is going, and if it goes well, I double my effort, and if it doesn't go well, I close shop and move on with my life. I have a personal policy that try everything once except drugs and D, because I prefer P. Try everything once, and if you like it, you keep doing it. If you don't like it, it doesn't take anything from you. That's how I live my life. I don't believe in giving up, but I also believe that you have to be realistic and assess your actions. We are going to talk about the history of organ in Ghanaian church, or keyboard in Ghanaian church. Why is it that every church you attend in Ghana has a keyboard? I noticed that Ghanaians, Africans, and African American churches typically have a keyboard at every church ceremony. Even if they have only one instrument in that church, it's going to be a keyboard. So why is keyboard essential to the African and Black church experience? The answer is simple. It's because Africans and by extension Black people are rule followers. So the rule that keyboard should be part of a church ceremony was something that was instituted by the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Emperor Charlemagne, and has continued in Black and African churches till today. How did that become part of the church ceremony? So organ, the hydraulics organ, is the first form of the modern keyboard that was invented in ancient Greece in the 3rd century. And so it was very popular in the Greece and then the eastern part of Europe all the way till the 7th century. Byzantine Empire had the organ as part of the amphitheater for a very long time. And in the 7th century, I believe, the Byzantine Emperor gifted the organ to Pepin the Short, father of Charlemagne. And so when Charlemagne became the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, one of his responsibility was to uniformize church ceremonies across the empire. So all churches had the same way of doing church in his empire. And so he had the organ, so he put the organ in his church. And so because of the sound of the organ, because of the majestic sound of the organ, it was in line with the imperial mood that he was going for in the church ceremony. So the organ fit into his idea of how church should sound. So even though the organ was expensive, they got it for the churches across the Holy Roman Empire. So that is how the organ got into the Roman Empire. It was a gift to Charlemagne's father, and Charlemagne liked the gift so much he put it in the churches. Simple, nothing spiritual about it. Just a gift that the person who received the gift liked so much. He said everybody in the world should have it. And there's nothing negative about that too. So that became the standard instrument in churches. So in the 10th century, the keyboard was invented for the organ. So the original organ was, like I said, an hydraulic organ, so water was being used to power it. But it was quite complicated. So the keyboard was invented to simplify the pipe organ. And because it was simplified, it was cheaper and easier to learn. So it became a big part of church ceremonies in the across Europe. So by the 10th century, when the keyboard was invented, organ was already the standard instrument in churches across Europe. And then from the 10th century, the keyboard took over. So the keyboard became the standard instrument for churches across Europe. So much so that they made it a religious instrument. So if you are a church in Europe and you didn't have an organ or a keyboard, people look at you like you are not spiritual enough. When Europeans came to Ghana, they instituted the organ or the keyboard in Ghanaian churches. So it was a thing that if you're a Christian church in Ghana, you have somebody to play the keyboard during the ceremony. And to teach people to play the keyboard, they started teaching the keyboard in schools. So the mission schools across the Gold Coast at this point had keyboard that they were teaching kids how to play. And let me take it further. In Peki, the Bremen mission taught Ephraim Amu how to play the keyboard. Funny thing, Ephraim Amu comes from a family of musicians. Dad was a drummer. So Ephraim Amu knew how to play the drum from when he was a kid. So when he went to school at the age of 6 or 7, he started learning the keyboard in the school. He already had his musical skills, so he just applied it to the keyboard. What I've realized is people who are musical, they usually will pick one musical instrument and learn how to play it and master it. It doesn't mean that is the only instrument they can be good at. Ephraim Amu, like we know, was good at almost every instrument. So he learned the keyboard first. So the Yenarai Assassini was written on the keyboard. That's why it sounds the way it sounds. That's how it sounds like it's a tree version of a hymn, because hymns were typically what was sung on the keyboard. When Ephraim Amu noticed that the local Ghanaians couldn't sing the hymns because the hymns were in English, he started writing hymns in the local Ghanaian language. So Ephraim Amu was one of the first people to start doing church music in local Ghanaian language, but he still wrote them according to the old European hymn structure. And this continued for a very long time. And like I said last week, Yam Ponsan was the first Ghanaian song to be recorded. So Ephraim Amu, when the Yam Ponsan was recorded, it became popular. So Ephraim Amu noticed that Ghanaians also like the guitar and the palm wine high life. So he brought the drums and the palm wine high life style of playing to the church. And he also realized from reading the Bible that God doesn't care whether you wear suit or kente to church. So he started wearing kente to church. So like we know, if you don't know, he was sacked from the church and he was employed immediately at Achimota School. So Ephraim Amu's attempt to bring Ghanaian instrument to church was met with resistance because the organ was already what Europeans have taught us was supposed to be the instrument in church. So the development of Pentecostal and other localized form of Christianity in Ghana made Ghanaians realize that we don't need just the keyboard, we needed other instruments in church. So that is how the conga and the guitar became part of church ceremonies in Ghana. The evolution of Ghanaian Christianity is related to Ephraim Amu's wearing of kente and Ghanaian women wanting to wear their local attire to church. So Ghanaian Christianity is a beautiful marriage of European tradition and Ghanaian tradition. That is what makes Ghanaian Christianity special. It is very typical to Ghana and to an extent Nigeria for Christians to blend their local cultural practices with church practices. When I went to Sierra Leone, I noticed that is not the case. Sierra Leonean Christianity is very westernized, and countries across Africa have a very westernized form of Christianity. But Ghanaian Christianity is very Ghananized because our forefathers, starting from Ephraim Amu, fought for us to worship God the way God wants us to worship Him. And how does God want us to worship Him? The way that is true to who we are. This is my series on Ghana music history. I'm trying to build why certain things are a typical part of Ghanaian music. Last week, we started with the guitar. Today, we have learned about the organ and how it became part of the Ghanaian music scene. And next week, we are going to continue to the brass band. So subscribe to this channel, comment, like, but very importantly, subscribe and share with other people. See you next week. Hopefully by then my phone will be back to working.